I was only 9, just 9, when Mama first told me I was born to be a wife. Not a doctor, not a writer, not a lawyer, not even a woman. Just a wife. That morning, I had just come back from playing suva with the boys in our dusty compound in Nsuka. My knees were bruised and my laughter loud. I remember the taste of freedom in my mouth, wild and reckless like mango juice running down my chin. Then Mama dragged me by the ear into our kitchen and slapped the back of my head so hard I saw stars. Are you not ashamed, Chidinma, 9 years old and playing with boys like a market tout? Who will marry you with all this boyish energy? I froze. Marry me? I repeated, confused. I had just learned to braid my own hair. I still peed the bed sometimes. Marriage was something my older cousins whispered about when they thought no one was listening. Mama didn't laugh. She squatted beside the pot of boiling yam, sweat running down her temple, her hands red from peeling. Her eyes burned with something heavy, not just anger, but fear. Listen to me, she said. A woman who plays too much loses value. A wife must be reserved, gentle, teachable. Do you hear me? That was the first time I realized I wasn't being raised to be me. I was being trained for someone else's home, someone else's kitchen, someone else's bed. I remember glancing at my younger brother, Obiora, who was dragging a stick on the ground and laughing loudly with his belly out. No one called him disgraceful. No one said he was losing value. He was allowed to be a child. But me? I was a project, a future bride in training, an investment Mama and Papa hoped would pay off with cows, rice, and respect from the in-laws. That night, Mama took me to her room and rubbed my skin with palm kernel oil. She tied my wrapper tighter and began instructing me like a soldier heading for war. Always greet a man with 2 hands and your head low. Never raise your voice. Don't ever let a man go hungry. If your husband cheats, endure, it's in their nature. And don't be too educated or you'll scare suitors away. I didn't understand it all, but something inside me began to break quietly, without noise. By the time I turned 10, I no longer played with boys. At 11, I stopped climbing trees. At 12, I burned my diary where I wrote stories about becoming a lawyer. And by 13, my dreams had disappeared like smoke in the wind. All that remained was what they were shaping me into. A perfect bride for a man I hadn't met. A wife they hadn't even asked me if I wanted to be. My childhood had become a ghost I could only glimpse in the faces of other girls. Girls who still laughed out loud in public, who still chased goats barefoot, who still believed they had time. But I didn't. My time wasn't mine anymore. Every morning, while Obiora, my younger brother, rushed off to school with his torn backpack and half-tucked shirt, I was in the kitchen, pounding yam or washing Papa's clothes under the cold compound tap. Mama would shout from inside, "Chidinma! The meat must be done before your father wakes up. Are you waiting for disgrace?" Sometimes I'd sneak to the back of our house with a book I'd stolen from Obiora's school bag. The words would dance before me like magic. I didn't always understand what I read, but it made me feel alive, like I could still reach for something beyond marriage and mortar. But Mama always found me, and when she did, her slipper would find my back before her words did. "I didn't raise you to become a stubborn goat," she would scream. "How many times will I tell you that books won't marry you? You think any man wants a woman who knows too much." That sentence sat in my chest like a rock. Books won't marry you. That was the logic. That was the curse. While boys were praised for dreaming, I was punished for daring. Papa, a man of few words and many rules, didn't interfere. He believed a woman's place was beneath her husband, and it was Mama's job to make sure I understood that before someone else's son did. One day during morning devotion, Papa read Proverbs 31 and said, "Chidinma, learn to be a virtuous woman. A woman who fears the Lord, serves her husband, wakes up early to cook and brings pride to her home. Not this one that's always hiding behind trees with books." They all laughed. I didn't. That night, as I lay on my mattress listening to the crickets outside, I whispered to myself, "But what if I don't want to serve? What if I want to lead?" I didn't dare say it out loud. Even the walls in my house had ears and they reported everything back to Mama. It was during the Easter break, just before I turned 14, that I first met the woman my family called a disgrace in lipstick. Her name was Nkechi Mama's younger sister. She arrived in a red Toyota Corolla with music playing loudly and sunglasses that made her look like someone from a movie. Her perfume floated into the compound before she did. She wore jeans, real jeans, not wrappers or long gowns like Mama. And her nails? Red, sharp, shiny like danger. The moment she stepped out of the car, Mama rolled her eyes and muttered, "Trouble has come again." Papa didn't even come outside to greet her. But I did. Something about Aunt Nkechi pulled at me like the way wind pulls at clothes on a line. She saw me hiding behind the door and smiled. "Are you Chidinma?" I nodded shyly. She bent slightly and whispered, "You look like me when I was still a good girl." That night, as she unpacked in the visitor's room, I snuck in with a tray of food. I wasn't supposed to. Mama said I was too impressionable to be left alone with Nkechi. But I was curious, starving for something different. "You're a pretty girl," she said as she picked at the agusi soup, "but you have that sad wife-in-training look in your eyes." I blinked. What does that mean? It means they're already killing the real you slowly with tradition, chores, and guilt. Her words felt like heat in my chest. No one had ever spoken like that in our home. She leaned in. "Let me guess. They tell you not to talk too loud, not to sit with your legs apart, not to read too much. They say your body belongs to your future husband, right?" I nodded again, the tray shaking slightly in my hand. "Do you want to be a wife?" she asked softly. I hesitated. It wasn't that I didn't want love. I just didn't want that kind of life the one Mama had, where her voice always sounded tired and her dreams had died in childbirth and boiled yam. "I don't know," I said. She chuckled. "That's a good answer. Don't let them force you to know too early." Then she leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "Promise me something." I nodded. "Don't forget yourself. No matter how hard they try to shape you into someone else's property, remember, you were born as a person before they decided you were a wife." My throat tightened. That night, I wrote her words down on a torn piece of paper and hid it under my mattress. The next day, Mama caught me laughing with Aunt Nkechi under the mango tree. We were talking about radio stations and books and women who never married but still lived full lives. Later that evening, she called me inside. "Stay away from her," Mama warned, arms folded. "She's bitter because no man married her. She lives in a flat alone and wears trousers like men. Do you want to end up like that? A woman with no covering? No respect?" I didn't answer. But deep inside me, the image of Aunt Nkechi, free, loud, unashamed, took root like a weed in my spirit. For the first time in my life, I wanted something different. I didn't have the words yet. but I knew I wanted more than the life they were grooming me for. And in that knowing, a spark was born. The following week, I got my period for the first time. I was sweeping the backyard, my wrapper tied tight around my waist, when I felt something warm trickle down my thighs. At first, I thought I had peed on myself, but when I looked down, my heart almost stopped. Blood. Not a little, a thick smear down my inner thigh, staining my wrapper like spilled palm oil. I froze. The broom slipped from my hand. Was I dying? My stomach twisted in panic. I didn't know what to do, who to call. No one had ever explained this part of being a girl to me, only that it would happen someday, and that when it did, everything would change. And it did. The moment Mama saw the stain, she shrieked like she had won the lottery. "Praise the Lord, Chidinma is now a woman, ooh!" Before I could understand what was happening, neighbours had gathered. Aunties clapped, Mama danced and started calling relatives. Papa's expression was unreadable, somewhere between relief and calculation. Someone brought malt and milk. A plate of jollof appeared. Mama hugged me tight, whispering, "Now your value has increased. God has remembered us." But no one asked how I felt. No one noticed the way I avoided their eyes, the shame burning in my chest. I wanted to disappear, to be swallowed by the earth, blood and all. That night I sat on the edge of my mat while Mama lectured me with pride glowing in her eyes. "From today, you must sit properly. No more crossing legs like a tomboy. No running, no climbing, no talking to boys. Your body is now ripe and men will start looking." I didn't understand the pride in her voice. It felt less like a celebration and more like a silent funeral. They were burying my freedom, and all I got in exchange was pads and pepper soup. "You must be careful now," she continued. "One touch from a boy and your life is ruined." "But Mama, I didn't do anything." She raised her hand. "Shh, don't argue. A woman's honor is in her purity. Your womb is your pride. Protect it." Womb, pride, purity. 3 words that would define every decision they expected me to make from that moment forward. That night I bled onto my mattress again. I didn't cry. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Aunt Nkechi. What would she say? Probably something bold like, "They've turned your body into a transaction." And she'd be right. They weren't celebrating me. They were celebrating my usefulness, the ticking clock that now counted down to marriage, bride price, and babies. I was no longer just Chidinma. I was a potential wife, a fertile investment, and though I didn't have the words for it yet, I began to mourn something I hadn't realized was dying: my right to be a girl. His name was Tochukwu. He was the boy with the shy smile and the perfect handwriting who sat 2 rows behind me in church. Every Sunday he would pass notes folded like origami birds, scribbled with Bible verses and silly jokes about the choir's off-key singing. He smelled like soap and old books, and when he laughed, really laughed, he'd tilt his head back like the sun lived in his throat. I never planned to like him, but I did. Not because he was handsome, but because he saw me, the me behind the chores and the forced smiles, the me no one else cared to notice. One day, after youth Bible study, he waited under the mango tree and handed me a torn paperback novel. The front cover was faded, but the title caught my eye: The Girl Who Refused to Marry. "Read it," he said. "I thought of you." I didn't know whether to thank him or cry. No one had ever thought of me like that, not as someone with a mind or a future, but someone who might dare to refuse. We talked a lot after that. Quiet conversations after fellowship, whispered laughs behind hymn books, shared secrets about wanting to leave the village someday, maybe even go to the university. He said I was smart. He said I had a different light in my eyes. And for the first time in my life, I believed it might be true. But nothing good stays hidden forever. One Sunday afternoon, Mama found one of Tochukwu's notes in my Bible. It was simple, just a line from Proverbs and a silly sketch of me in braids, smiling. Her face turned grey. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she folded the note slowly and said in a voice so calm, it frightened me. "So this is what you're doing? Disgracing me with a boy?" "Mama, it's not." Slap. The sting exploded across my cheek before the sentence even left my mouth. "Do you want to become pregnant like those girls on the street? Is this why I kept you away from books and boys?" I cried, not from the pain, but from the shame. Papa heard the noise and came in, and within minutes the whole compound knew I was talking to a boy. The punishment was swift. No church programs, no fellowship, no stepping outside the gate after 5 p.m. And worst of all, I was pulled out of Sunday school for now until Mama was sure I had forgotten the spirit of waywardness. No one asked what he said. No one asked how he made me feel seen. They only saw a girl losing value, a girl becoming dangerous. Days passed, weeks. Tochukwu stopped coming to church, or maybe he came and avoided me. I never found out. But one evening, as I fetched water at the stream, I found that same book he gave me, The Girl Who Refused to Marry, floating in a pool of mud near the path. The cover was torn, the pages wet. Someone had destroyed it. I picked it up anyway. And that night, as Mama snored peacefully and Papa's transistor radio hummed in the hallway, I dried the pages one by candlelight. Because even if they beat me, silenced me, locked me away, they could not kill the part of me that still wanted more. The day they told me I was getting married, I was pounding ogbono in the kitchen, my arms aching, my blouse soaked in sweat. Mama stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her wrapper. There was a strange smile on her face, the kind people wear when they're hiding a secret they can't wait to reveal. "Chidinma," she said sweetly, "you remember Uncle Abuka from Lagos? The one who came during Christmas?" I nodded. I barely remembered the man, tall, quiet, and distant. His son had sat in the car most of the visit, windows rolled up, air conditioner humming. "Well," she continued, "his son, Obinna, wants to marry you. He relocated from the UK, computer engineer, very gentle, very well-to-do." I dropped the pestle. "Marry?" I repeated, sure I had misheard. Mama's eyes gleamed. "Yes. Isn't God good? His people came to greet your father last week. The introduction is set. They've already brought drinks and goat. You're lucky. At 19, see how your prayers are being answered." "But I didn't pray for this." The smile fell from her face. "What did you say?" I swallowed. "I don't know him, Mama. I've never even spoken to him." "You don't need to," she snapped. "We know them. They are good people. And who are you waiting for? That church boy you disgraced us with. Do you want to become like Aunt Nkechi?" There it was again, the curse of Nkechi, the woman whose independence had become the family's favourite cautionary tale. My heart thudded against my ribs. This couldn't be happening. I had only just returned to school. I had just begun to dream again, slowly, secretly. "What about school?" I whispered. Mama scoffed. "Obinna said he can continue your education if he likes. But what is school compared to marriage? This is the real certificate, my daughter, a man of your own." That evening, Papa summoned me to the parlour. He didn't look up from his pipe as he spoke. From today, carry yourself like a married woman. No more roaming, no talking to boys, no gossip with those foolish girls from the tailoring shop. I stared at him, my mouth dry. Papa, I don't want to marry him. He looked up slowly, his eyes hard. You will marry him. Do you want to bring shame to this family? After all the money they brought for you? You think you're too special? Do you want to end up like Nkechi, 40, with no husband or child? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What could I say? That I wanted to go to school? That I wanted to love someone who knew me, not someone who bought me like meat from the market? That I wanted to choose myself? None of those things mattered here. That night I cried on my bed. Silent tears soaked into my pillow as the voices of my family echoed through the walls. They were happy. They were proud. They were already talking about what wrapper I would wear, which jewel would match the beads, how many cows they expected at the wine carrying. No one asked me what I wanted. No one cared. I was no longer a girl. I was a prize, sealed and packaged. A gift to a stranger who didn't know my favourite colour or my laugh. But he had what mattered: money and a visa. And in our world, that was enough. The dance was loud, the lace on my skin itched, the smile on my face was stitched on like embroidery, tight, fake, and painful. People clapped, shilulated, and sprayed nearer notes until the air smelt of sweat and money. Obina stood beside me like a mannequin in Agbada, handsome, silent, foreign. He barely looked at me, only smiled for the camera. They called me the lucky girl. But all I felt was dread, growing in my stomach like a swallowed stone. At night, they drove us to a hotel in town, not the one I used to admire on my way to Sunday school lessons, but a small, private one near the Express. The room had white sheets and artificial roses on the floor. Obina thanked his parents over the phone, then turned to me. So, he said, finally alone with me for the first time, you're quiet. I was shivering slightly under the borrowed nightgown Mama insisted I wear. It was white, silky, too revealing. I clutched the edge of the bedsheet like a shield. He walked toward me, slowly, calmly, like someone about to unpack a parcel. I know this is awkward, he said, but let's not waste the night, okay? I nodded because I had been raised to say yes, even when my throat burned with no. They told me to pray for a good husband. They told me to keep myself for my wedding night. They told me to cover my legs and guard my virtue. But no one ever told me what to do when the man you're given to sees you like property. His hands were not cruel, but they were cold, firm, impatient, and unfamiliar. I closed my eyes and imagined I was elsewhere, anywhere. My body flinched, and he noticed. "What's wrong?" he asked, clearly irritated. I'm not ready," I whispered. He exhaled, long. "You've been trained for this. Your mother said you were not stubborn." That word, trained, stabbed my chest. Like a goat. Like a bride prepared for slaughter. Tears slid down my cheeks as I lay there, lifeless, my spirit climbing out of my body just to survive it. Afterward, he rolled away, picked up his phone, and started scrolling. I curled to one side, clutching the pillow, my thighs sticky, my pride crushed. I thought of all the books I wanted to read, the certificates I wanted to hang, the classroom I wanted to teach in someday. Now I was here, lying beside a man I didn't know, wearing a ring that felt like a shackle. The first week after the wedding was quiet, almost peaceful. Mama called every morning to check if I was being submissive enough. Her voice was filled with pride, telling me to hold the home front, and never let a man complain. But Obinna barely spoke. He was either on Zoom calls with people abroad or scrolling endlessly on his phone. He didn't hit me. He didn't insult me. He just treated me like wallpaper. I served him food. I warmed his bath water. I laid beside him at night, stiff as stone. Sometimes I watched him sleep and wondered, is this what Mama meant by joy of marriage? One afternoon, he tossed me his laptop and said, help me fill out this form for your visa processing. Which was facade. I did. I filled in my name, my birth date, my passport number. That was when I noticed something strange. An email popped up while I was typing. Subject, Re. Divorce finalization papers. I froze. Obinna walked in with a bottle of Sprite and I quickly shut the laptop. But my hands trembled the whole day. That night I waited until he was asleep, then turned on the laptop again. I typed in his password, his mother's birth year. The email was still there. He was finalizing a divorce with someone named Melissa, a woman in the UK. They were married for 4 years. The same man who told my parents he was a good Christian bachelor. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. The reality hit me like cold water. I wasn't just a wife. I was a replacement. Was that why he relocated to Nigerian? I asked myself. When I confronted him the next day, his response chilled me to the bone. He didn't shout. He didn't deny. He simply said, what does it matter? You're here now. Your job is to take care of the home and bear children. That's why your people married you off. I felt something inside me shatter. The training, the obedience, the virginity sacrifice, the lessons on cooking, cleaning, kneeling, all of it reduced to utility. I called Mama in tears that night, hoping, praying she'd say, come home, my daughter. But she hissed. You're lucky you even married a man that lives abroad. Do you know how many girls are begging for that chance? Wipe your tears and behave yourself. Behave myself. That's all anyone ever wanted from me. Not my thoughts, not my dreams, just my behavior. I stood in front of the mirror that night and looked at myself. I was 19, educated, intelligent, passionate. But none of that mattered anymore. Because I had been raised to be a wife, not a woman. There were no bruises, no torn clothes, no shattered dishes, no visible signs. Obinna never raised his hand at me. He didn't have to. His weapons were sharper, silent, invisible things that tore through my spirit. It was in the way he corrected me in public, with a smile that made it seem like a joke. In the way he'd speak about other women's cooking, comparing it to mine while guests laughed. It was in the way he'd leave the room when I tried to talk. Or worse, the way he'd scroll through his phone while I cried. I'd once believed abuse came with blood and screaming, but Obinna proved that a man could destroy you without ever touching you. At first, I didn't have words for what I was feeling. I only knew I was fading. I stopped dressing up. I barely ate. I forgot what my laugh sounded like. And no one noticed. Not my mother, who always asked, is your husband treating you well? And when I said yes, because I didn't know how to say no, she'd beam and say, good girl, endure. Marriage is not sweet every day. Not my in-laws, who only praised me when I smiled during their endless lectures about submission. Not even God, or so I thought, because I prayed. Every night. Lord, please help me love this man. Help me not to feel so alone. But silence was my only answer. One day I served Obinna dinner late because I had been cramping and dizzy all day. He looked at the plate of rice like it had offended him. You don't respect my time, he said calmly. This is how careless wives become useless. I apologized. I even tried to explain. But he waved me off and walked out. I sat there holding the tray, blinking back tears. And that was when it clicked. I was disappearing. Piece by piece, day by day. And no one would even know I was gone. I started journaling in a hidden notebook. I titled it The Things I Cannot Say. In it, I wrote about how Obina once left me stranded at a wedding because I didn't wear the heels he picked. How he deleted my WhatsApp once because an old colleague, a guy, texted, "Happy Sunday." How he used scripture like a whip, quoting, "Wives, submit to your husbands," every time I protested. But what broke me wasn't the cruelty. It was the gaslighting. The way he'd say, "You're too sensitive, Mint. You think too much. You make everything dramatic." Eventually, I started to believe him. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe this was what being a wife meant. But something inside me, small, silent, stubborn, refused to die. That night I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, "This is not love, and this is not living." And for the first time I allowed myself to feel angry. Not just at Obina, but at everyone who raised me to believe this was all I was worth. The house was too quiet. Not the comforting kind of quiet, but the hollow, suffocating silence that echoes like a scream in your chest. The nursery door was slightly open, just the way I had left it for months. Inside, the crib stood untouched. The pale yellow curtains danced gently in the breeze. And on the shelf above the tiny dresser sat a row of unopened baby bottles, silent witnesses to a dream that died before it could breathe. I touched the edge of the cradle and the pain hit me fresh, raw, and sharp like shattered glass in my throat. My baby was gone. But how could something that never took a breath feel like it took mine? It had happened 3 months ago. I was 4 months pregnant when the cramps started. Obina was out of town for a work conference. My mother said it was just pregnancy pains. I believed her. I had been trained to trust everyone but myself. By the time the bleeding started, I was alone, crawling through our living room, my dress soaked with fear and blood. I dialed Obina. He didn't pick up. I called again and again. By the time he returned my call, I was already in the hospital, curled on a bed that reeked of antiseptic and grief. The doctor looked at me with those sorry eyes. "I'm afraid you've lost the baby." And just like that, the life I had whispered prayers to in the dead of night was gone. I had already picked names. I had already imagined the way the baby would look, my nose, Obina's eyes, maybe my father's stubborn chin. But now all I had was silence. And a house filled with things I no longer needed. Bibs, onesies, pacifiers, and dreams. Obina returned the next day. He didn't cry. He didn't hold me. He simply said, "Maybe next time you'll take better care of yourself." As if it were my fault. As if the guilt I carried wasn't already heavy enough to drown me. That night, I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling while he snored peacefully. My arms were empty, my body still aching. And I realized that even in loss, I was alone. People came with condolences. "A baby will come again." Everything happens for a reason. God gives and takes. Just be strong. But no one has said mourn, cry, shatter if you must. No one said you are allowed to feel this loss. Because I was raised to be strong, to endure. I was raised to serve, to be the pillar, the nurturer. Even when I myself was bleeding. But the empty cradle haunted me, not just because I lost my baby, but because it was a symbol of everything else I had lost. My voice, my dreams, my freedom, my identity. The woman I might have been. That evening, I took down the baby mobile. I folded the clothes. I closed the curtains. And for the first time in months, I looked at myself in the mirror. Pale, drained, unrecognizable. I pressed a hand to my flat stomach and whispered, "I'm sorry. I wish you'd known a mother who was allowed to be whole." And then I cried, not just for my baby, but for the girl I used to be. The letter came in a plain white envelope, creased at the corners, like it had travelled a long, reluctant road before arriving in my hands. There was no return address, just my name written in careful cursive, to Chidinma. My heart skipped. Aunt Nkechi hadn't written in years. I sat by the window and opened the letter with trembling hands. It read, "My dearest Chidinma, I heard about the baby. I know about the silence. And I know what no one else will tell you. It's okay not to be okay. I know you were raised like I was, to serve, to submit, to smile even when your soul is aching. They trained us to be wives before we were even women, taught us to keep the home warm, the bed ready, and our mouths shut. Taught us that our worth lies between our legs and inside a ring. But Chidinma, hear me. You are more than a wife. You are a whole world. I left my marriage not because I was weak, but because I refused to raise daughters who believed that suffering was a woman's inheritance. I was called names. I was exiled from family meetings. But I found my peace. I found my voice. You have it too. I see the cracks forming in your armor. I see the questions rising like smoke in your eyes. Don't ignore them. Listen to them. They are not rebellion. They are resurrection. Grieve your loss, but don't forget yourself in the process. Let this pain be the match that lights your way home to you. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to be more. And when you are ready, really ready, I will be here waiting, with open arms and stories I was once too afraid to tell. With love that asks nothing in return. Nkechi, I read it again and again. Each word peeled something open inside me. It was the first time in a long time that someone spoke to me, not my role. Not the version of me who cooked, cleaned, smiled, and served, but the woman beneath the performance. I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest. And for the first time in weeks, I breathed. Not just air, but hope. The letter from Aunt Nkechi didn't just comfort me. It ignited something that had long been buried under layers of obedience, tradition, and fear. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror that night and whispered, "Chidinma, what if there's more?" That whisper grew louder over the next few days. It followed me as I washed his clothes, stirred his soup, and lay silently in bed beside a man who didn't see me. I had lost a child, not just once, more than 3 times. It was as though my body was rejecting him for me. But what I had truly lost, what I was still losing, was myself. The breaking point came when he came home later again, reeking of alcohol and entitlement. "I told your mother today that we're trying again next month," he muttered, undoing his belt. "She says it's time to give me a son." No mention of me. No recognition of the tiny grave, barely a month old. No pause. I stood there numb, clutching the towel I had used to dry his plates. He reached for my body. I flinched with disgust. He not only for the first time hit me ruthlessly, he forced himself on me. That night, as he snored beside me, I laid awake, eyes wide open, heart pounding. I needed to leave. I didn't know how, but I knew I would die if I didn't. The plan begins. It started with small, quiet moves. I created a hidden WhatsApp account under a fake name and reached out to Aunt Nkechi. Her response came within minutes. Say the word, and I'll come. I started hiding small amounts of money from the weekly food allowance, 1,000 naira here, 2,000 there. I reactivated my old email account. I hadn't used it in years. It felt like digging up a secret weapon. I pretended to be more submissive than ever, more agreeable, more silent, so he wouldn't suspect a thing. All the while I watched. I learned his patterns, when he left the house, when he returned, how long he stayed at the beer parlour, what keys he carried, which ones he didn't. One rainy Wednesday, he left for a business trip to Owerri. 3 days. 3 days. I packed only what mattered. Important documents, my mother's old jewellery, the little money I had saved, and the letter from Aunt Nkechi. Then I stood in front of my wedding photo, stared at the smiling version of myself, and whispered, "Thank you for surviving. Now I have to save you." I tore the photo in half. At 4:15 a.m., before the cocks crowed, I locked the door behind me and stepped into the rain. Not just into the street, into freedom. There are moments in a woman's life when the world stands still not because everything is perfect, but because she finally chooses herself. That moment came for me in the dim blue of dawn, as the streetlights flickered and the rain drizzled gently like a baptism. I had no umbrella, no suitcase, no map. Only a luggage bag with my name scribbled inside, and a burning will to be free. My feet moved fast, faster than they ever had in that house. For years, I tiptoed around eggshells and expectations. But that morning, I walked with thunder. Past the church where I once prayed to become the wife they wanted. Past Mama Nkeru's stall where women gossiped about rebellious girls. Past the compound where I first arrived as Mrs. Obina. I didn't look back. Because I was terrified that if I did, I'd remember how much I had endured, and still consider going back. "Madam, where you to go this early?" a taximan asked. "Anywhere but here," I said. He gave me a look, puzzled, then nodded, as though he knew what that meant. I didn't know where Aunt Nkechi was taking me. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of not knowing. I whispered to myself, "Goodbye, Chidinma, the wife." On the bus to Abuja, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. It contained a photograph, torn but mended with tape. The one I had ripped before leaving. I stared at the woman in the photo, smiling, lost, trying so hard to be everything. I whispered to her, "You did well, but I have to live now." Then I let the wind take the photo out the window. When I reached her gate, Aunt Nkechi was already waiting, standing at the edge of the compound, barefoot, arms open like a refuge. I collapsed into her arms. No words, just tears. Years of them. She held me like Mama used to when I fell off a bicycle. And all she said was, "You chose life, that's all that matters now." That day I walked away. Not from a man, but from silence, from shame, from the prison of pretending. And as the sun began to rise, so did Chidinma the woman. At Aunt Nkechi's place, my first morning was the quietest I'd ever known. No shouting, no orders, no fake smiles. just a hummingbird outside the window and the smell of yam porridge. I stood before the mirror and whispered, "Good morning, Chi." "No, Mrs. No, obedient wife." Just me. It felt strange, liberating and terrifying. Healing is not always loud. Sometimes it is found in soft mornings and slow cups of tea. Sometimes it's in learning how to call your own name without flinching. For months after I left, I wasn't sure who I was without a man's surname or a society's approval. All I knew was that I wanted to live, truly live. I started journaling. At first, the pages were angry, bitter, broken. But day by day, they softened. I wrote things like, "I love to read, not just cook. I hate the sound of raised voices. I never liked purple wrappers. I want to go back to school." I was meeting myself for the first time, and I was beautiful. My mother came visiting after so many failed attempts to convince me to go back. I wasn't ready to see her. Not yet. Not after everything. But there she stood, wrapped in her favourite sky blue lace, head tie sharp and prideful, just like the woman who once told me, "A good wife endures. That's her reward in heaven." She had called the night before. Aunt Nkechi answered. I overheard her say she's fine, no, she doesn't cry at night anymore. And that morning, she arrived. The living room shrank when she walked in. We both stood in silence, years of unspoken pain floating between us like dust in the sunlight. She looked older, smaller. Her hands, once always folded in judgment, now trembled slightly. I offered her water. She didn't drink it. Instead, she asked the question she came with. "Why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" The conversation I needed. Years ago, I wanted to scream. To say, "Because you wouldn't have listened." But something in her eyes stopped me. I sat across from her and simply said, "Because I was taught not to talk. I was raised to endure." She dropped her gaze, then whispered, "I was too." We sat in silence for a while. 2 generations of broken women, raised for survival, not for selfhood. "I didn't know better," she said, barely above a whisper. "I thought marriage was the goal. That suffering was normal." I nodded slowly. I understood her now. Not as my mother, but as a woman who had been trained by fear and culture to mistake chains for jewelry. "I failed you," she said. "I should have told you that you could walk away, that you could be more than someone's wife." Tears rolled down my cheeks. Not from pain this time, but from something deeper. Release. I whispered, "You were only teaching me what they taught you." And for the first time in my life, I saw my mother cry, not as a stern matriarch, but as a girl who never got to choose her life. We talked for hours. About her own forced marriage, her miscarriages, her silent nights, her dreams buried in someone else's shadow. And by the time the sun began to set, I held her hand and said, "Maybe we both get to start over." She smiled, her wrinkles deepening, but softer than I remembered. Before she left, she held me tightly and said, "Thank you for being brave. You broke the curse I was too afraid to name." And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. My mother had come to save me. But maybe, just maybe, I saved her too. I wrote a letter I never planned to send, to the girl I used to be. "Dearest Chidinma, I'm sorry they only taught you to be a wife. I'm sorry they never told you that you were already whole. But look at you now. You found yourself beneath the ashes. You bloomed, you fought, you healed, and I am so proud of you. Love, Chidinma, the woman. And as I walked down the dusty road that led to my new job one Monday morning, I smiled at the sky and whispered, I was raised to be a wife, but I chose to be a woman. No woman is created for the sole purpose of serving a man. Healing begins with self-discovery, when a woman learns who she is beyond titles, expectations, and fear. Thanks so much for listening to my story.